All right, so let's get into it. What brings us here today is something incredibly special to my heart. I think the opportunity to read and the accessibility of literature is an intellectual freedom and a right that should be afforded to all. However, what brings us here today is something staggering, something that is going on within communities across this state. Right. So we learned from the Office of Intellectual Freedom, a subset of the American Library Association, that the freedom to read is essential to our democracy, yet is continuously under attack. These are words from decades ago, the opening lines from the 1953 Freedom to Read statement. Yet nearly 70 years later, we are charged with still defining what intellectual freedom means, and this right of every individual to both seek and receive information, and to be associated and available without views of restrictions. Unfortunately, this is not the story being told in today's times here in America. If you take a close look at this graphic that was provided by PEN America, which represents a recent American Library Association study determining the book bans and challenges that are happening across this nation. The darker the hue of orange and red, the greater the number of books being challenged and ultimately banned. The American Library Association has been recording numbers for nearly 20 years now, and unfortunately, this is the highest year that they have recorded these numbers of book bans, challenges, and attempts at inaccessibility in literature. Challenges are motivated by a desire to protect children from inappropriateness, sexual content, offensive language, but what we've been realizing is it's been more so steered towards the multicultural experiences that make up our school systems today. To further conceptualize what this number looks like, we witnessed an 841% increase in these book bans and challenges in comparison from 2020 to 2021. I think what else is also interesting with this graphic is you see how over the years, the numbers go up and down and they teeter slightly. However, in this final year, in this most recent reported year, numbers have skyrocketed. But what is the result of this? Where does this come from? How is it that numbers and book bans, and how can this negative attention be brought forth to our librarians who safeguard children's literature and beyond? Well, on April 22nd, nearly 2 years ago, Governor Ron DeSantis signed House Bill 7, which prohibited any feelings of guilt and anguish brought upon by employee training or instruction, also known as the Stop Woke Bill. This was something that rendered obstacles and obstructions that were in place for our teachers and librarians across the state of Florida. It is my belief that through the term indoctrination, a sense of fear-mongering, and a politically charged, restrictive language, that through this lens, many books met their demise. There's people in the lobby, I don't let the people in the lobby. So throughout this discussion, I'd like to share with you just a few of the terms that I'll use just to ensure that we're all aligned. You may hear the term challenge and banned, and know that those are two separate phases that happen when books are up for discussion. To challenge a book is a protocol that's in place by the American Library Association alongside different counties that books are housed within. To first challenge a book is something that must be done in order for it to be banned. Where we see books being banned typically takes place at school board meetings where commentary and moments of incivility present themselves one after another. This term censorship, knowing the suppression of ideas, is something that's not new. Unfortunately, over hundreds of thousands of years, when you think back to the Far East, throughout several dynasties, throughout the Library of Alexandria, censorship and suppression of knowledge and literature is something that has showed itself time and time again. We've seen this movie. Burnout is something that I believe is a direct result of what's going on in today's times. And Dr. Christina Maslock defines burnout as this sense of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and a lost sense of personal accomplishment. I'm excited to talk a little bit more about burnout as the presentation goes on. But know that when I mention incivility, we learned from Anderson and Pearson that Incivility brings about moments of deviant behavior, rude and discourteous interactions. Librarianship, what brings the focus of this study. Did you know that there are over 117,000 libraries across this country that are manned and womaned by over 158,000 librarians? There are 4 different types of librarians that you'll typically see: academic libraries, public libraries, school libraries, and special libraries that are typically found in hospitals and museums. The focus of this study will focus merely on public and school librarians. Know that you may hear me jump from using terms such as school librarians, media specialists, school-based librarians. However, these words are synonymous. Public librarians, you may hear me reference as a community-based librarians. Oh, there's people in the lobby. Right. Welcome, welcome. Please stay on mute. One thing I'd like to share, the requirements of a public and school librarian. You may be asking yourself, well, what does it take? How do I become this librarian that you speak of? To be a public librarian, you must first earn your master's in library information sciences. This program must be ALA accredited by the American Library Association. Is only offered in 2 institutions in the state of Florida: Florida State University and the University of South Florida. To be a school librarian, you do not need your master's in library sciences, but you do need your teacher certification in education and school media. So through the use of these 2 mediums, know that there is a sense of protocol that is in place to make sure that we're hiring the best possible librarians we can. To continue to bring it closer to home, my theoretical framework and the lens that I took to complete this path and continue to research into just what was going on was led predominantly by critical librarianship. The pillars that I believe support this lens that helped me further understand the experiences of our librarians throughout South Florida were critical race theory, culturally responsive teaching, burnout, and critical multicultural analysis. Again, the cornerstone of my theoretical frameworks were critical librarianship, led by Emily Drabinski, who interestingly serves as the American Library Association president for the 2023 and 2024 term. Through her publications, we learn how critical librarianship acknowledges social and economic and political contexts and interrogates power structures and systems in place that challenge the traditions of libraries across this country. We also know that through critical librarianship, hidden labor is surfaced, something known as vocational awe. This sense of understanding, thinking this relevance, I learned, and I'm jumping ahead, but I learned from one of the librarians that she said we've become so relevant that we are now irrelevant to so many people. And I thought that spoke to this level of vocational awe in terms of understanding how librarians safeguard the literature and the accessibility to all. When we think about burnout, we are met by UC Berkeley professor, Dr. Christina Maslock. The term burnout regularly began to appear in the 1970s, and in the 1980s is where you got to see Dr. Maslock really do her work. She created the instrument that I used, the Maslock Burnout Inventory, which has been used across the world and translated in several languages. The validity and the reliability of this instrument had proven and spoke to me when I realized that the World Health Organization and the International Center for Diseases uses the burnout scale to determine fatigue and burnout present within the workplace. The success of this instrument was so great, it was, I don't say renovated, but they created it, they tailor-made it to so many different professions outside of the World Health Organization. So we start to see different variations of the Maslock burnout scale, whether it's for human services, the general survey, the educator survey, and so forth. For this research, I chose to use the general survey as opposed to the educator survey, just because of the emphasis that it put. I learned that all librarians are teachers in a sense. However, that instrument scale was more so tailored to our K-12 teachers. So why? Why am I here in front of you all? Why am I so passionate about what it is that our librarians, in terms of their experiences, are going through? Well, for one, the freedom of speech should not be diminished in a way where librarians are pressured to second guess the appropriateness of literature. This moral intersectionality that librarians find themselves between what is right and what is the law causes career fear. Thus, burnout is a direct result of censorship, hidden labor, and politically charged restrictive legislation. And that's what brought me to this thinking. Now, there was endless literature reviews and journals that I just continue to immerse myself in. I won't take you down that rabbit hole, but I will remind you the importance of school librarians and public librarians within the spaces that they occupy. Know that school librarians link classroom content together. They work alongside K-12 teachers when it comes to curricular planning, co-planning, and extending the lesson that is presented. Keeping in mind our public librarians, in a way, they educate and they teach as well. This is shown through classes, their organized library collection, and their tailor-made programs for the youth in which we serve alongside the elderly. Multicultural literature, I believe, was a strong part that fused both populations of librarians together because it gives voice to the underrepresented people and provides a mirror into the culture and a mirror into other cultures. Critical librarianship stresses to make the library more inclusive for all, and knowing that incivility works as a daily hassle, with feelings of unpleasantries and a threatening demeanor constantly posing itself in different various forms. Culturally responsive teaching develops voice, dialogue, and power, and is something that I believe supports the reason why librarians continue to challenge the systemic approach to the norms present. So what are the questions that guided my research study? When I think of my overarching, know that this is a mixed methodology. So I wanted to use my quantitative and qualitative data to work as one so that I can better learn and understand these experiences of our South Florida librarians. Our overarching research question is, what is good librarianship? And how does burnout impact its realization within South Florida? Notice I tailored to 3 counties specifically. Our 3 tri-county areas within South Florida, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. I believe in order to answer my overarching research question, I must first support it with quantitative research questions. I wanted to know, is there a significant difference in the levels of burnout existing among public and school-based librarians? My sub-questions to support this quantitative analysis, is there a difference in levels of burnout among Miami-Dade and Palm Beach County public librarians? Notice the footnote. In full transparency, it was a struggle. And I fell a little short in terms of building up a strong Broward County population. I'll show the participants in a moment, but for that reason, I chose to exclude them for one of my sub-questions in an effort to avoid skewing the data. Our research sub-question 2, is there a difference in levels of burnout among the school libraries amongst the 3 geographic locations? I had enough data to be able to compare the 3 and run my one-way ANOVA. My qualitative research question, once participants had the opportunity to complete their survey, I asked for a voluntary opportunity to continue and to meet one-on-one so that I can reflect a little bit more about what it is that they had answered to within the survey, and also use that quantitative data to circle back and get a better feel for some of the answers that they had provided. And finally, my last qualitative research question was, what are the sources of burnout? Simply put, what is stressing you out? What's stressing you out? Who is stressing you out? And how are they stressing you out? My methodology, the research design, was an interpretive phenomenological analysis using an explanatory sequential design. A lot of fancy words to say, I use my phase 1 at one time, and I use that data to help me build upon phase 2's protocol, which led that interview and allowed me to provide the mixed method understanding of what's happening. To participate within the survey, it was criterion referenced. I used purposeful sampling, public and school-based librarians from the 3 geographical locations. If you were out, if you did not fall in between either of those demographics that I was looking for, then I unfortunately had to exclude the data. So this was a part of the data when I gathered within the survey to determine just who my population and who was it that I was collecting information from. Excuse me. Ethical consideration, I went through Barry University's institutional review board, followed by 2 forms of consent that were used at the beginning of phase 1 and the beginning of phase 2. Participant protection, meaning I use pseudonyms. This is where you laugh at me. Because of the anonymity that I wanted to ensure, I wanted to protect our librarians. So I was for certain using pseudonyms that I'll share in a moment. And of course, the instrument permission to use the MBI survey that I also shared to the powers that be, meaning the director of librarians within the Dade County, Broward, and Palm Beach, and also several school principals, just to continue to share the legitimacy and the research that I was looking to find success. All right, we learned from Cresswell, this mixing of data occurs when we combine the quantitative with the qualitative, and we know that this data is presented in a way where I wanted to conceptualize it, and keeping in mind just what the journey looked like and how it was interwoven and how one step was connected to the other, which led me to my data analysis. We're good. So in my survey, there were 52 total participants. I was able to wrangle in 52 librarians over the 3 tri-county areas within South Florida in a matter of 30 days. Within these 30 days, my 52 South Florida librarians, those who volunteered to be a part of phase 2, these numbers are represented by the 17 in the 30, by the dashed line within the pie graph. So you can see my qualitative participants total 12 public librarians, followed by 3 school librarians. So initially, to further break down the data, to give you more of a sense of what the population looked like, what it comprised of, I think one of the most interesting things to note within my gender population is the gender. It's a no-brainer. And of course, women run librarianship, but it's also interesting to be able to include the experiences of a non-binary librarian. I thought that offered a diverse sense of representation within my data, which provided another window into the burnout that is faced within South Florida. Keeping in mind the years of experience, nearly half of my participants have served in librarians for over 11 years. That was something that I wanted to know. I wanted to know, how long had you been in the profession? How long, why, what keeps you in the profession? And do you recommend the profession to other people? To give you a breakdown of my participants, we can see our grand total of 52 and the breakdown of the Tri-County area, followed by our qualitative participants, which were our one-to-one interviews, with a grand total of 15. Notice as I spoke, public librarians in Broward, for my people online, I hope you can see my cursor. Our public librarians in Broward was a mere 1. That was a limitation for me, and for that reason, why I had to adjust research sub-question 2. I'd like you to meet the participants. All 15 of our qualitative participants are librarians across the Tri-County area, noting their representation. Of course, I use their pseudonyms and I rename them to protect their identities, but take a look at their position titles. You know, they're representing the spectrum of librarians, from the top to the bottom, from the branch manager to the front desk receptionist. I thought that provided a colorful sense of what was to be learned. The years of experience, the genders, our county breakdown, and of course, are you a public librarian or are you a school librarian? How I analyzed this data, I used SPS statistical testing. For my research, for my quantitative research questions, I used an independent t-test, which was a general test that compared the means of 2 populations. But my research sub-question 2 used a one-way ANOVA because I compared 3 groups. In my phase 2, I used in vivo and multi-cycle coding, to answer my qualitative research questions. And combined, I was able to answer the overarching research question. So what does this instrument look like? This MBI 16-item self-reported survey focuses on 3 subscales: emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and professional efficacy. With these 3 subscales combined, gives us an understanding if burnout exists. So if we take a look at my arrows, as emotional exhaustion and cynicism goes up and professional efficacy goes down, we are presented with the presence of burnout. This was evident as I began to run my independent t-tests and I began to discover the populations, the means, and the standard deviations of each 3 subscales. There was always something interesting that stuck out to me with this data, however. Noting that there was no statistical difference found in several of the tests that were ran, there is burnout that is in existence. And seeing the levels of emotional exhaustion and cynicism coupled with a professional efficacy score that is higher than all of the comparable means. This was different. This was a bit provocative. Because what this says to me is not only does burnout exist within our school and community-based librarians, when we compare the two in each of the 3 geographic locations, we see that there's a sense of personal accomplishment. Professional efficacy, as defined by Webster, tells us that it is a measurement of confidence and one's ability to complete their task. So what you're telling me is even though our librarians are going through such tough times, this level of accomplishment, this confidence in knowing I know I'm doing my job to the best of my abilities and it's working exists within both populations, school and community-led librarians. So I wanted to address my sub-questions as well that began to compare populations, repeating many of the cycles or the processes as well, except when we get to research sub-question 2, and we use the one-way ANOVA to compare our 3 populations, Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, and Broward. So again, we're met with high means in comparison to one another, thus letting us know that burnout not only exists, but this sense of professional efficacy is still lingering. So then we switch gears. We use this information to guide the conversation within our follow-up one-to-one interviews. That time for me. And this is when we get into the meat and potatoes. And this is when we get into the raw reactions and just what's happening and what they have to say. Simply put, is burnout present? Different librarians are telling us we're tired, we're really tired, there's less of us, but there's more need. There's pressure from the administrative top and from our public patrons, so we feel squished. Our compassion is used as a weapon against us. And this sense of vocational awe. If I won't do it, who else will? Lingers. It's only a matter of time before burnout and fatigue sets in. So again, what are the sources? Where is this coming from? We know it exists, but how and why? I met a Miami-Dade high school media specialist who's told me she's removed about 1,000 books. So on top of what she currently has to do, which are support the teachers in extending the lesson, she also has to do an inventory and relinquish her library of over 1,000 books. You may be asking, where do these books go? Depending on the tier of the K-12 school. So if it's an elementary, then the books, after they're deemed inappropriate, they get passed on to middle school passes it on to high school, and the high school relinquishes them all to the public libraries, creating even more work that is already existing for them. I'll take a moment, I don't want to read to you, but these are raw reactions, word from word. A librarian in Palm Beach told me that she was approached by a patron who said, I noticed there was a pride flag on display. Isn't that disgusting? How do you respond to that? How do you maintain your professionalism, but still instill in that sense of pride that you have? I think what broke me down the most was one of the last quotes that I brought in, and this reference to being called a pedophile or a groomer, based solely on the books that are on the display at the front entrance of the library. It leads librarians, sadly, to second guess the appropriateness of the literature that they want to put on display, which causes them to turn their back on what they read growing up. And that is this intersection. If you notice the words in orange, they're representative of many of the codes that I use to determine from the themes, The orange is representative of the themes that I gathered from many of the codes through the in vivo software that I mentioned earlier, or 10 total codes. So let's land this plane. I think I've held you long enough. Let's land this plane. The overarching question, what is good librarianship and how does burnout impact its realization? So these are directly from my participants. Good librarianship is showing empathy and being able to help those in need, connecting people to services who are struggling in a lot of ways and don't know where to go for help. Now let's connect the two. Let's bring back one of our first tables that we used to compare the school and community librarians, noting that sense of professional efficacy and understanding just what was one of my final questions to participants. Would you recommend this job to anybody else? Do you have any regrets? What is something you tell the next good librarian or the next librarian? And a Broward County public librarian told me, even through unpleasant times, do not be afraid to go into librarianship, for you are going to make a difference. If that isn't a sense of confidence and personal accomplishment, and more aligned to this research, a sense of professional efficacy, I don't know what is. And I think when we join the data as one, we understand that not only librarians are going through a lot, but they're doing it how they should be doing it. And they're proud of what it is that they're doing. This sense of accomplishment. So my unanticipated findings, this level of incivility was very high. I did not know people were getting punched in the face for being asked to wear a mask. I did not know that library patrons were threatening librarians simply for what books were on display. The sense of mental health and housing insecurity. I don't mean to diminish our school librarians the slightest bit, but our public librarians are dealing with a lot, depending on the zip code. In the area that this library, that their public librarian is in, may determine the number of our unhoused population in proximity, may determine the number of high school students who are getting out of class and they're crossing the street and going to the library that's in walking distance to avoid going home. Keeping in mind, libraries, public libraries, are central information hubs that stand for so much more than the books that they provide. They provide the accessibility to the World Wide Web, offering job services and government applications for completion and assistance as well. The safety of our librarians and the sense of vocational awe were other anticipated findings. And when I think of my limitation, that unbalanced participation. Quite possibly looking back, maybe I could have drove to more Broward County libraries, public libraries, to fill that gap and fill that void as I did in Dade County. But nonetheless, it was a limitation. Email non-responsiveness, I was left on red a number of times, and that's okay, because we follow up with another email as professional and polite as possible, or we thank them for their time for being told no. The job security was a limitation as well, as participants said, let me ask my boss, let me check in. Permission as well was something that limited me. However, I did not allow that to stop me from following up or finding someone else that I could get to complete my survey. Some of my recommendations, as I look back on my study, to assess, empower, and support, as plainly put as I can. Many of the librarians I met with, they thanked me. They said, thank you so much for this space. No one ever really cares to ask how I'm doing. Not as many people value me or tell me they are appreciated. However, there are patrons who come in and give treats and candies and thank you cards. But I'm talking about internally. I'm talking about within librarianship. There should be a biannual burnout intervention check-in. There should be some way to check in on the mental health and the stability of our librarians. This sense of empowerment, I believe, should exist. I feel like librarians are constantly playing defense and they're sticking up for books. And once that book has been banned and has gone gently into the night, well, I wouldn't say gently, it's gone. And we have yet to determine how to bring books back. So I believe we should put some of this power into our librarians' hands, the ones who know the books the most, and offer a way for them to bring books back, or at least put it up for discussion. But right now, I've yet to learn of protocols in place, not to say that none exist, that do empower librarians in a way. And support. I may be leaning a little bit more towards my public librarians again, because this sense of houselessness and this mental health supportive practices and procedures, I believe, should exist. From hygienic practices to socks to sanitary napkins, whatever it is that we can get, something should be in arm's reach for our houselessness population for many of our libraries within the Tri-County area. I know specifically the librarian who told me this. She said, as good librarianship goes, I think we're good. We've always been good, and we will continue to be good. She said, I think what changes is society, and the needs of the job itself changes, and we have to evolve with it. That is my indicator of hope. That is knowing that even amidst this great divide, and as we compete against social media and screens and the digitization of texts and literary works, that our librarians are still leading the way. They're showing us just what should be done as children are held at the forefront of the accessibility of literature. Thank you all for this privilege and for this moment. It's been nothing short of a privilege to be a part of this journey. And thank you again. I welcome all questions.